These animals exist in only one place on Earth. One day, in the not-too-distant future, they may not exist at all. In the past, their ancestors thrived across much of the island of Madagascar, but now, only traces of them remain. Many are huddled in one tiny refuge. They have been driven deep within the rocky walls of the Ankarana Plateau, where danger has been unable to reach them so far. Guarded by razor-sharp pinnacles, this is a fortress under siege. "165 million years ago, Madagascar broke away from Africa and began drifting east. Its life forms evolved in isolation, and the island became a kind of parallel world with its own distinct identity. But much of that world has disappeared under the pressure of civilization. A full 80% of Madagascar has been changed by the hand of man. Ankarana, near the northern tip of the island, is one of the few areas left that echoes what this place once was. A team of naturalists from Madagascar and Great Britain is camped just outside the plateau walls. They are here to explore the richness of the wildlife within and to develop a plan to conserve it. Zoologist Phil Chapman heads the project.
Madagascar is one big conservation problem. The whole island is. I was interested to see whether Ankarana really deserved protecting more than any other of the many areas that need protecting in Madagascar.
Another member of the group is caving expert Sheila Hurd. She will guide the team through the natural underground maze that leads into the plateau.
The caves in this region tend to be very wide, and many of them big old dry caves, connecting one isolated forest to another. Caves provide channels of access for exploration reasons, really. It's the wildlife's the attraction, and in many ways it's attracting its own destruction because of that.
There are nearly 60 miles of charted caves in Ankarana and intimidating terrain throughout. Sunken forests within the plateau are one of the last strongholds for some of Madagascar's rarest animals. Despite its impenetrable appearance, Ankarana is vulnerable. As the plateau becomes ever more isolated due to the clearing of surrounding forests, its situation becomes more precarious. Any disturbance in the fragile balance between the wildlife and the available resources could be devastating, since most animals could reach no other refuge. The research the team does here could increase support for the protection Ankarana needs so badly. Local guide Bled Michel is one of the few people who has been inside Ankarana's walls. With him is naturalist Michael Rakut-Narine. Though he is an expert on many of Madagascar's wild places, this is his first visit to the plateau. Chapman has studied the situation closely.
The problem with Ankarana is that although the forests are well guarded by the cliffs, the area of forest isn't big enough to support the range of wildlife that lives there now. As the forests that surround the massif have been cut down, it's concentrated a terrific variety of life into a very small area. They've got nowhere to go, and there's no communication between that forest and other nearby forests. They're stranded, they're marooned on an island of plenty in a sea of waste.
Since man reached these shores some 1,500 years ago, the story of Madagascar's wildlife has taken a tragic turn. Though this was one of the first countries to establish a national system of nature reserves, many of the protected areas were closed to the general population. Many of the Malagasy people have never even seen the animals they've jeopardized, much less had the chance to appreciate their value. In the capital city of Antananarivo, the bustling Zuma market seems a universe away from the plateau. To the great majority of the population, which lives in rural areas, wildlife represents competition for valuable space. Subsistence farming is the only means of support for more than 3/4 of the people. Where trees once stood, there are rice paddies. Cattle have replaced wildlife. What was once a great natural forest has been decimated. Conservation is not a useful concept to families struggling to put food on the table. Ankarana, far to the north, receives minimal government protection. The island of plenty is completely unguarded. And though farming would be impossible here, there are signs of invasion. A logging road leads into the largest of the sunken forests, and nearby settlements threaten the delicate balance of the plateau. Even the 600-foot limestone cliffs are not adequate protection. Still, they provide a formidable obstacle for the expedition. To penetrate the interior, the team passes through a narrow canyon. The route takes them to a cave that leads to the first of the 2 sunken forests they plan to explore.
Come down over to the right here. What's actually that? Over to the right here is a good route down. The thing that impressed me most about the caves was the sheer size of them. It's also quite easy to get lost. In some areas, there are lots of loose blocks, maybe fallen from the roof. Some of these blocks are enormous, the size of a house. And it's very easy to lose your sense of direction and to find you're wandering up some side passage, just totally lost and not knowing where you are.
An ancient river carved this cave through 7 miles of solid rock, etching delicate scallops with its slow-moving currents. In some places, the roof soars to 500 feet. Elsewhere, the cave is as wide as 200 feet across. It is one of the biggest known caves in the world. At the end of the cave lies the first glimpse of the sunken forest. It looks rugged, not a reassuring sight for people carrying 70 pounds of gear, including backpacks, paddles, and inflatable canoes.
Walking through the forest and all the tangled branches is again a different sort of challenge, especially with a big load on your back, constantly being wrapped up by some branch and trying to step from rock to rock. You're walking on almost a bed of these branches that bend under you and swing around.
In 1771, a visitor commented that Madagascar is the naturalist's promised land. Nature seems to have retreated here into a private sanctuary where she could work on different models from any she has used elsewhere. Here, you meet bizarre and marvelous forms at every step. The group's movements are carefully monitored by one of Ankarana's mysterious inhabitants.
Yeah, looks like it.
It is a ring-tailed mongoose. These small creatures are one of the few carnivores in this idyllic forest. At the sound of the strange new intruders, their only reaction is to disappear.
Sheila?
Yeah?
Sheila, look up in the tree straight ahead.
Oh, yeah. What are they?
Crowned lemurs, I think. A whole group of them.
The team has caught sight of a troop of lemurs, Madagascar's most renowned animal. These cousins of monkeys and apes are totally unique to the island. Lemurs, ranging in size from mouse to man, ruled here for millions of years. But hunting and destruction of their forests has already wiped out a third of the lemur species. All those that remain are endangered. Perrier's black sifak is probably the rarest lemur of all. Before this sighting, no one knew that they inhabited Ankarana.
Ankarana is a very special place. It has a very rich collection of animals and plants. For example, there are more lemurs in that little tiny block of limestone living in the forests hidden within it than there are in any other comparable-sized area of Madagascar.
At times, the expedition was even closer than they realized to the forest's wildlife. The leaf-tailed gecko is unique to the island. Even sharp-eyed hawks and mongooses can miss them as the lizards move slowly through the world they mimic. But they may become even more difficult to see. Their disguise has not kept them safe from the destruction of their territory.
Many biologists are convinced that Madagascar is the #1 conservation priority in the world. And that's because it has such a unique fauna and it's changing so rapidly. There's so much destruction going on, it seems unlikely that its wildlife is going to survive very much longer. We were struck straight away in visiting Madagascar by how beautiful its wildlife is and also how vulnerable it is, how trusting it is.
Tiens, tu vois les lémuriens sur les rochers là? Ah oui? Voilà.
It seems that many of the animals are far more prepared to let themselves be approached by people. They seem far less shy and wary and defensive and far less well protected.
These Sanford's lemurs have probably had no contact with humans before this encounter. Threatened elsewhere in their tiny range, Ankarana is the species' most important refuge.
Just the fact that they weren't frightened of us, that's what's so amazing. They're actually, if you're sitting still, will walk up to you. And it's just a very unusual experience to have animals run around beside you quite happily.
Lemurs are the island's only native primates. This ancient group is the closest living approximation to the squirrel-like ancestors of man himself. Sanfords spend most of their time in the treetops. They only warily come down to drink.
Great. He's the biggest male that's come down so far. Biologists say that lemurs are rather primitive members of the monkey family. That really isn't doing them justice. They're full of curiosity, trust, play. They're beautiful. A lot of them had their tails straight up when they stopped. There's some sort of signal to dominance or whatever in the way they hold the tail. He's the first one I've seen who's with his tail just bent.
Lemurs often live in small troops which work together for the common good. While some of the samphers drink, others act as guards. This dominant female is prepared to head off any intruder. The male lookouts sound the alarms. A small crowned lemur moves forward cautiously. He wants a drink, but he's wary of interfering while the larger, more powerful sandfords are nearby. Finally, he decides to make his move. It was a noble effort, but he's been quickly chased off by the female sandfords. When the sandfords have had their fill, the crowned lemurs seize the opportunity. There are few surface streams within the plateau. Most of the running water flows underground. This stream forms a link through a cave to the next sunken forest. The team has decided to take advantage of it.
Our top priority was to ensure we had good boats with us. We were very conscious that we would be going into the caves with rivers and crocodiles, but at the same time we were having to carry all our equipment with us. It was a fine balance trying to take everything we needed to be safe. Each member in the party had a helmet and light, and we had to have spare lighting with us. We were able to take just 2 canoes with us.
They have no backup for their inflatable boats, and they can't be sure what lurks within the cave.
Ok Michel, on va un peu à gauche.
Ouais, gauche.
Ça va plus? C'est quoi ça? C'est un passage là, à droite?
Regardez dans l'eau parce que beaucoup les boussons qui passent.
In the pitch-black depths of the river live creatures with no use for eyes, for there is no light. It is mainly touch, by means of long, sensitive whiskers, that allows these blind shrimp to feed. Their major predator is the blind cave fish. Like the shrimp, the species is unique to these caves and to Ankarana.
Allez, 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 allez. Allez.
Ok.
Pas trop près.
Daylight shines from the entrance to the second sunken forest.
Okay, thanks for
Now we
that.
go back this way.
It's great. There's sun coming through. Careful, rocks there. Okay. How should this on?
As the team prepares to pack up the canoes, they're greeted by some familiar shapes.
Et tu vois là? Tu vois? C'est bien ça. Ok. Regarde.
Crowned lemur lookouts are posted at the mouth of the cave. Though the animals have nothing to fear from the expedition, an enemy does lurk nearby.
You got a good landing site there, Sheila.
The fouche is a chief predator of the lemur. Although it is related to the mongoose, it has evolved cat-like features in this parallel world. The lemur mother takes no chances with the baby clinging to her side. They are gone before the fouche has a chance to attack. The expedition begins to move through the sunken forest, formed when the earth collapsed over an underground passage. They are in a place with the densest population of primates in the world, on an island where 85% of the plants and animals are unique.
There's this magical feeling when you're walking through the forest and you come face to face with a lemur and it reacts to you not with fear initially but with curiosity. Suddenly this little furry face looks around a tree at you from close up and you feel very close to it in some way.
There is a theory that the use of the hands promotes intelligence by increasing learning through touch. Lemurs use their hands to feed in a way that suggests progress along the evolutionary path. A covering of sensitive skin, like that of humans, aids their dexterity. This male-crowned lemur has found some fruit, but the pickings are slimmer for the female. She heads off to forage on the forest floor. The baby clinging to her side is only a few days old. As yet, it isn't interested in the ripe fruit its mother has discovered. Lemur young are born with a very tight grip, as are human babies. For as long as 2 months, much of their lives will be spent holding fast to their mothers.
Ah, about time too.
Bonjour.
Hello.
The expedition finally reaches its first campsite. The group joins up with their support team, which has brought fresh supplies.
Oui, j'en ai déjà vu en plein jour.
In Ankarana, the local people actually don't hunt the lemurs. There's a superstition, a taboo about killing lemurs in that region, which is not true everywhere else in Madagascar. But this is one more reason why Ankarana is so rich in lemurs.
In the evening, the animals that have been active during the day are at rest, and the creatures of the night emerge. This land crab, like all crabs, has gills rather than lungs. Water is stored in its body, and the animal mixes it with air by frothing bubbles through it. Before it begins a long night of scavenging, it replenishes itself with water from the forest floor. While the team fills up on a dinner of rice and vegetable stew, Chapman asks about the fush. Is it feared by the villagers? Bled Michel tells him about a local belief. The people say that the fush is bold and clever, raiding hunters' camps and stealing the food that has been left cooking on the fire. It puts the fire out by wetting its tail in the river and shaking it over the flames. Many legends have sprung from this ancient island. Among the myths is a story of a great bird so large that it could carry an elephant off in its talons. The real creature, the Epiornis, was the largest bird known to have existed. At half a ton, this flightless relative of the ostrich survived until only a few centuries ago. A giant lemur once lived that was the size of a man, leading to flights of fancy about its appearance. It too vanished when the forests were cleared by settlers. Outside Ankarana, the forests that remain are disappearing with ever-increasing speed, making the plateau more and more vulnerable. Farmers slash and burn their way through huge areas each year. Though Madagascar is the fourth largest island in the world, the appetite for land is voracious. Again and again, the Malagasy clear acreage for crops and cattle by setting uncontrolled fires. The exposed soil is easily swept away by vicious erosion. The scars, known as lavaca, disfigure vast areas. The precious red soil fills the rivers, washing the lifeblood of Madagascar away. Left behind is leached and useless land. The farmers must continually move on to find new areas that are still productive. The devastation shows little sign of ending. This cycle is destructive to virtually all life in Madagascar. The people will soon run out of land to clear, and it will be increasingly difficult to grow the rice and raise the cattle that support this rural economy. More than poverty looms. Hunger stalks the island, following the path of the fires that sear the land. The destruction has reached the very borders of Ankarana. Inside the plateau, the team is ready to begin the second day of exploring this fragile world. First, a hearty breakfast is enjoyed by all. Half of all species of chameleons live only in Madagascar, more than on the whole continent of Africa. A Malagasy legend tells that chameleons use the independent movements of their eyes to look into the future as well as the past. But it is doubtful they see a hopeful world when they look ahead. Chameleons change color according to mood, as well as for camouflage and in response to temperature changes. Their opposable toes are extremely adept at grasping branches. Long tails come in handy as an extra limb. The male Petter's chameleon, recognizable by the horns on his nose, is unique to Ankarana. Slowly, he approaches a smaller female. She's unsure of his motives. Is he there to court her or harm her? Suspicious, she tries to hide under the branch. The male continues to advance. As the female's wariness deepens, so does her color. Undaunted, the male continues his slow but inexorable progress. Panicked, the female tries another ploy. She gulps air to make her body look bigger. Hissing is yet another bluff. Realizing the male means business, she makes a run for it. She escapes, unmolested and unharmed. The morning trek begins easily enough for the team, but all around them, small dramas are being played out within the forest. A Phelsuma gecko enjoys a meal. He will eat almost anything, but avoids nearby flatted bugs. Their waxy tails are unappetizing to him. The insects, however, provide food in a less direct way. They draw out the sap from plants and convert it to a sugary honeydew. Ants rush to feed on it. The gecko, too, has his fill. For dessert, he decides to sample a few of the ants. The morning is an active time for birds, as well as for the team. Birds are Rakut Narin's specialty, and he has a wealth of them to observe here. Many forest species are as dependent on Ankarana as less mobile animals. These birds avoid open spaces where they would be more vulnerable to predators. The northern Jiri generally feeds on insects, but cannot resist the nectar of the Hildegardia tree. The Suimanga sunbird also feasts on the nectar with a beak that is well suited to the activity. Unique to Madagascar, the Suimanga fills the same role as the hummingbird, which does not exist here. The beak on this hook-billed vanga marks him as a predator, one large enough to catch small chameleons and geckos, as well as insects. For the two naturalists, a highlight of the morning is catching sight of a Madagascar harrier hawk. These birds are as big as an eagle and just as impressive. Wings would come in very handy in conquering this forbidding interior stretch of limestone. It will be difficult and dangerous to cross, but the expedition is determined to see what life exists among its barren peaks. Over the eons, rainwater trickling down over the limestone has etched channels which form deep trenches. As they widened, the ridges between them were eaten away. The razor-sharp spikes are known as tsingy for the odd sound they make when struck.
C'est bon pour les botanistes. Ouais. Pays des zérophytes. C'est passé?
Climbing over the zingy is a real challenge. One moment you're pushing through the trees and on the blocks on the bottom. And next minute up onto this very sharp zingy. We all wore gloves just to protect your hands. But you could never trust any handhold or anything you stood on. It'd be a sharp zing noise and it would snap off. So all the time you have to constantly be watching the movement.
We are floundering around from sharp edge to sharp edge, watching very carefully. Your concentration is 100% the whole time, and it has to be, because you know that one slip could result in serious injury.
Others in the area find the tsingy much less of an obstacle. This is a regular route for the lemurs, and to lay claim to it, the dominant male marks the ridge with scent from glands at the base of his tail. For obvious reasons, this must be done slowly and very carefully. A male harrier hawk spreads itself against the sky, its wingspan close to 6 feet wide. His slightly larger mate sits patiently while he searches for prey. His double-jointed legs are specially designed for reaching deep within the crevices of rocks and trees. These are powerful birds. Even small lemurs are not safe from the harriers. The male has spotted something among the rocks with his keen eyes. He thrusts his long legs into the crevice. This way, he's far less vulnerable to serious injury from attack by his prey than if he used his beak. It is highly unusual for a bird of prey to hunt in a cave, and to hunt upside down as well. But even these techniques are to no avail. Frustrated, he puts safety aside. He tries for the prey with his beak. Still no luck. From this new vantage point, he'll search for an easier target. The team is rested from their half-mile trek across the treacherous Zingi, but it ends abruptly with a 330-foot drop.
The first thing to check for when you approach the top of a cliff is for loose rocks. This is always a great danger, especially if there's Zingi around, that if you've got a rope on it, rocks will fall down.
Below lies the Green Lake. The water looks peaceful enough, but it leads to an underground river filled with rapids. But the team isn't worried about that just yet.
This cliff is very high, and there's some trees on the way down, so another thing to watch for is the rope snagging. As you go down, you have to keep checking the rope constantly that it's not snagged and that it's not rubbing in places. When the rock's very sharp like that, the big worry is that with your weight on the rope, it will cut through the rope will rub against the sharp edge, just cut straight through it.
The expedition prepares for the last leg of the journey. They set off on a lake that has never been crossed by man before. Nowhere else in the world could they have found in one small area such immense caves, underground rivers, jagged Zingi, and sunken forests, and some of the rarest animals in the world. There is no other Ankarana.
Okay. Spectacular. Okay. Voilà. C'est sounds like a lot of water up ahead. Oh, we've got a carry here.
After a smooth start, progress becomes more difficult. The route is blocked by boulders, so they will have to do things the hard way.
Boats don't get any lighter, Phil.
As they set off, the water is fast but shallow, filled with sharp rocks that could rip a hole right through the canoes.
À droite maintenant, un petit peu à droite. Une fois une vitesse au rocher.
Ok.
Une fois là pour l'équilibre. Qu'est-ce que tu penses de ce virage?
Safely through the rapids, the way out of the fortress is almost in sight.
Ça va?
But what the team doesn't see could be as treacherous as what they do. Mysterious footprints are all along the riverbank.
Ah, ok. Oui, mais il dit qu'il y a un rocher là pour éviter.
Over here,
Alors,
Phil.
oui, on va tout à l'heure. On y est.
I think we can get up on the beach here.
This region's the only place I know of with crocodiles in the caves. When we first caught sight of the eyes of the crocodiles in the water, just staring straight at us, the reflection from our headlamps picked up the eyes of the crocodiles just on the surface of the water. And they just sit there watching you without moving.
Crocodiles are very wary creatures. Their first reaction to having lights shone at them in the darkness of their cave refuge was to do nothing, to sit tight, and they weren't likely to make any move to attack us until they were quite convinced that we didn't pose them any threat.
So gradually you could approach them, and at the very last minute they would just go down without a ripple. And then perhaps further up the passage, you would hear a plop of one going into the water, sliding in.
Crocodiles have learned to avoid man by hiding in these caves. But it has been reported that one hunter recently killed 11 crocodiles in a single night. The entire population here is estimated at less than 300. Even in the light of day, the future of Ankarana does not seem bright if nothing is done to save it. To these 4 individuals, Ankarana is all they had hoped and all they had feared.
When I first went out there, it really was with the main interest in exploring the caves. But gradually, as we spent more time in the forest, seeing the wildlife that's living in there, the emphasis has changed to feeling that that area is really so important that it needs all the protection available.
We didn't know what the full extent of the wildlife in Ankarana was until we went to see it for ourselves. And we then discovered that there were far more species which nobody had recorded. So the whole area was far richer than we could possibly have imagined before we went. It's the living heart of the reserve. It's going to disappear very quickly, probably within the next 5 years, unless some steps are taken to protect it.
As a result of this expedition, a project has been launched to protect Ankarana. A proposal has been put forth to have the area declared a national park. But a long road is ahead for those who want to save what remains of the island's wildlife. Some way must be found for the Malagasy to maintain their way of living without jeopardizing the animals. This will take time, and until that time comes, the cliffs of Ankarana must withstand the onslaught of civilization alone.